Welcome here at a new video from Self-Oriented. Today it's all about the psyche. Go! We would be delighted if you support our channel. You can do this by subscribing to our channel for free now. And feel free to leave a like. Free, but really supports us tremendously. Accordingly, leave a subscription now. I would say we start directly with the video, but first check out the links in the video description. Then I would say let's start. Today it's all about psychoanalysis, and the psychoanalysis is one of the most famous works of, that's it for me, see you next time, ciao. Sigmund Freud. He composed the whole thing in his work from 1900. The entire work was called Dream German. And accordingly, psychoanalysis is exactly that, because psychoanalysis is the interpretation of dreams, which reflect inner desire. That is, the whole thing can be explained using the iceberg model. It's like going into the unconsciousness. Go there, which basically concerns what occupies people at their deepest level, what their deep inner desires are. If you view this in a 3-instance model, then these are the inner drives that attack you. I'll see you next one. Come on. As it were, to do something, and most of the time it's things that have been bothering you since childhood. You are. Were given, and accordingly it is so interesting to look at psychoanalysis, and accordingly he also uses the previously mentioned theories that I have just outlined here, especially important the 3-instance model. And the iceberg model, which is also quite interesting, is how he describes the phases of psychological development or psychosocial development. He has described, especially in the wrong phase, where and according to him, yes, a certain conflict arises. We often have here precisely because of the Oedipus course complex. For example, we often find that dreams are shaped and desire is shaped, among other things, how parents deal with one, and the whole thing he has explained using a well-known example. He had a patient named Anna O. In his notes, she is presented as Anna O. In truth, her real name was Bertha Pappenheim. This was discovered afterwards, and she is the most famous case that Sigmund Freud analyzed, so to speak, with the help of his psychoanalysis. And he found that certain diseases she simply had, mental illnesses, can be traced back to her early disease. And this early childhood was indeed characterized by it. For example, that they never had a real father had access, and accordingly experienced an Oedipus complex, which then led to her having problems in later life. And Freud applied his theories here. That means he looked at both psychosocial development, among other things, but also how does Eros, the love drive, work, and how does his iceberg model affect on the other side? How is all this anchored in the unconscious? And he did this with the help of psychoanalysis, so dream interpretation tries to uncover, and all of it then can transmit and explain. And so he was finally able to help her by pointing out these problems, and that is then treated accordingly or discussed with her enormously. That is one of the most famous examples, or the most famous example that he, found. And with that, it should have been from this short video about psychoanalysis. You can feel free to watch other videos about Sigmund Freud. Look at it. But that should have been it from this video. Feel free to listen to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or Google. Check out the podcast. Otherwise, look in the video description. There are also a few links to our Instagram. That's always it. Keep going, and welcome here to this video, though. And it is self-oriented today.
Let's go into the details of the biography
By Sigmund Freud. Enjoy it. Video. Before, of course, we would be delighted, as always, if you would support us a little. You can do that by leaving a like here. Feel free to subscribe to our channel. It's free for you. Just a little support for us. We'd be absolutely thrilled if you now please subscribe. Otherwise, check out the links in the video description. Now I'd say let's get started with the biography and the exciting part. Sigmund Freud is practically the first of many famous and well-known thinkers, or just simply people who have discovered quite exciting things in psychology. Among other things, he inspired Erikson, but he also inspired his daughter Anna Freud, and thus encouraged to explore further. And his life journey begins on May 6, 1856 in Freiburg. He was born there and lived there for quite a while, relatively happy. Is part of in a barely religious family. and grows up very sheltered, even in an academic household. That is certainly also important. Then, if you look, it is 1873 until 1885, so for 12 years, then just medical studies. He studies, he qualifies, so he becomes a professor as a neuropathologist, so he has a quite impressive life journey ahead of him. Or rather, he embarks on an impressive life journey. 12 years might be long for many current bachelor's, master's, studies can take a long time, but 12 years is the norm for medicine. The habilitation really a very, very short period of time that he committed there, and accordingly only this time span is very interesting.
The more impressive
and
it is that
then 1885 and 1886, he discovered the hysterias in women. He then works in the Parisian nerve clinic, which means he travels relatively early and gets quite far. In France, that's where he's working. He's in an intensive care unit and takes a look at everything there. He discovers the hysterias, and this essentially becomes the foundation later for what he will discover later, namely dream interpretation, psychoanalysis, which he will just discovered, and it comes out in 1900. That's probably one of the most important, the works that he manages to produce during this time. Afterwards, quite a few interesting ones follow. Works, very interesting habilitations, a sort of continuation, and the whole thing is then interrupted by the alarming news he receives in 1923, in the year 1923, because with him, cancer diagnosis. And we all know, of course, research was far from advanced back then. How this whole thing is today, it's still a strong and difficult disease. But we see, diagnosed in 1923, he also has, but still fortunately have a relatively long time to live. He lives another 16 years and accordingly becomes very old. He reaches over 80 years old, which of course is a very high age even for that time. He dies in London in 1939. Time game happened, but still very important and basic things. It significantly influences today's lessons as well as today's psychology. When we take a look at 1923 to 1923, he indeed developed the three-instance model. This three-instance model is also beyond the boundaries of psychologists, became very interesting when we then look at the philosophy. That is, there he has also very interesting, yes, may also provide food for thought for others, and always keep this in mind, although that he had to undergo 30 operations during this interim period, had to suffer a lot through his ill influenced. That's why it probably took 7 years for the 3D instance model, but it's also a very large piece of work and therefore naturally super interesting. And then in 1930, he brought out the underhook in culture, and that is then, so to speak, his final work, which he dedicates to religion. What he writes about religion and what he naturally does with it then is strongly characterized by just that, influences of his parental home, that he grew up relatively non-religious. We will look into this later in further videos to educate and delight. If you'd like to follow us on Instagram now, and feel free to check out our podcast. We have a lot for you there. Maybe you are already listening to this as a podcast, because all the episodes that appear here are also always available as a podcast. We would be thrilled if you stop by. Otherwise, that should be all from us for today. Then I would suggest check the links in the video description, enjoy, subscribe to our channel, leave a like. And bye. Welcome here to another video by Self-Oriented. Today we are going to talk about Freud's defense mechanisms. So I wish you a lot of fun with the video, and we would be delighted if you would support us. You can do this by now click on the subscribe button. The whole thing is free for you and is therefore a huge support if you subscribe to us now. Subscribe for free. Otherwise, I would say let's dive straight into the video about defense mechanisms. The thing is, defense mechanisms are about an unconscious reaction to create a defense mechanism that Sigmund Freud just discovered. And this unconscious reaction accordingly takes place in, this happens in the subconscious or preconscious. It is essentially the toughest. A transition flows between these two parts of the iceberg model, i.e. before it is brought into the subconscious. B. Penetrating before one depicts a person's inner desires, so to speak. There is one last defense mechanism that wards off the whole thing, so to speak. And therefore it is thus made possible that the preconscious is also well protected. Depending on which model one applies, these defense mechanisms are also found in the preconscious. This all serves to prevent being overwhelmed by emotions, behavior, and this overwhelming can lead to, for example, being exposed to mental problems. So what basically pleases at the core also not as interested in what Freud essentially analyzed. Accordingly, so is this supposed to be the protection that is provided by this mechanism, the defense mechanism, so to speak? Say, is called. However, this can also lead to the ego when it gets exhausted, that there is a strain, so to speak. That's what he called it. This can then lead to further problems if someone consistently relies on these cooling mechanisms, so to speak. Because he wants to prevent his unconscious things. He does not want to disclose because he has an even deeper psychological problem. Then you actually have the opportunity that the ego also gets exhausted. This is where the deselection mechanisms emerge relatively early. To 6, that means the whole thing is to be set in the third phase of psychosocial development, so to speak, the phallic phase, and is accordingly the core feature of his model of psychosocial development, the various phases, which are then, of course, also implemented to apply to the other two models, which are very well known from him, so to the 3-instance model and to the iceberg model.
Where we also have more videos.
If you're interested, feel free to check out our playlist about Sigmund Freud. Otherwise, we now have, again, 4 examples of defense mechanisms, which will surely interest you again. And it's about rationalization, which means you try to prevent an unconscious reaction through the defense mechanism, which is guided by emotions. And this is tried by rationalizing something away. This means that one gives an intellectual explanation. Find something that might be triggered by emotions. That is, if you try to remember your past through emotions, then you try the whole to rationalize away. This is the mechanism of the downside. The first defense mechanism that we wanted to show you here. I think many are also familiar with this from everyday life, as these defense mechanisms can certainly also in everyday life. For example, the projection of the problem onto another often uninvolved person. You can certainly all understand this. You had a bad day at school, you had a bad day at work, and then you come home and something else comes up. An unfavorable remark that simply does not belong there at this moment, or that you did not expect, which comes across skewed, so to speak, and which this remark can then lead to you just solve everything. According to the steam boiler model, you could say that here a bit after nulting, transfer. So that you can combine these defense mechanisms beautifully with aggression theories, but it's not so simple. Just a quick note, definitely. This projection of the problem, this can lead to you letting off steam, so to speak, and just trying to solve all your problems as also to project something else, and thus one could, according to Freud, then prevent an unconscious reaction from is carried out, or that one turns to the unconscious. The suppression, that is another defense mechanism, is then the idea that something non-existent strained on something sublime, so to speak. This means that one sees a process differently again, that one protects oneself through it, so to speak. That you are interpreting something that is actually not there at all. And so launch Freud is just the possibility that you try this defense mechanism, not perceiving something. Take it. And what is not perceptible is also the last defense mechanism, namely the denial of a conflict, that can lead to you not being able to access this unconsciousness, accessing the pre-consciousness. An unconscious reaction takes place, which leads to him simply denying the conflict that is actually taking place, thereby, and yes, a defense mechanism comes into effect, which then doesn't even allow us to get to this unconsciousness. So that's how you have the possibility. So these are the ways Freud describes to implement these different defense mechanisms. At this point, I would say thanks for watching. If you are interested in more videos, feel free to subscribe to our channel. It's all free for you. So just click on the subscribe button now. It won't cost you anything. It's a huge support for us. Otherwise, feel free to leave comments. If you have ideas for more videos, leave a like. And feel free to check out our other videos. Otherwise, we've linked our Instagram and our podcast in the video description. And then I would say thank you very much for coming. Take care and bye. Hello, welcome now.